Michelle Obama arrived at the hotel with a calm and hopeful heart, her eyes shining with pride as she looked up at the tall building that had once only been a dream in her mind, a dream she had worked day and night to make real, a place she wanted to symbolize dignity, comfort, and fairness for every guest who walked through its doors. The lights outside glowed warmly, the lobby inside was bright with chandeliers, and the sound of soft piano music floated gently in the air as she wheeled her small suitcase across the polished floor, taking in the sight of guests seated comfortably on couches, reading magazines, talking softly, or sipping coffee from delicate cups. She wanted to see her hotel not as its owner tonight, but as a guest, to feel what other travelers felt when they walked in tired, hungry, or hopeful for a peaceful night. She had come without announcing herself because she believed true leadership came not from distance, but from closeness, from knowing how people were treated when no one thought the boss was watching. She had her ID, her reservation slip, and her natural kindness in her voice as she stepped up to the front desk where two employees stood behind the counter. One young man with sharp eyes and a stiff stance, and one young woman who seemed busy, but whose attention quickly sharpened when she noticed Michelle standing there. Michelle smiled, her words gentle and respectful as she said, "Good evening, I have a reservation under my name." She slid the slip of paper across the counter with her ID, expecting at least a quick confirmation or even a friendly welcome, but instead, she felt the first sting of coldness as the young man looked at her briefly and shook his head with a dismissive tone, saying, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have any rooms available tonight." His words cut through the soft music and seemed to echo louder than they should have. Michelle kept her smile, though it was now smaller, and she replied with patience, "That can't be right. I made this reservation weeks ago. Maybe you could check again, please." But instead of opening the computer or giving her ID a closer look, the young man shifted uncomfortably and avoided her eyes. The woman leaned toward him and whispered something, her face tightening with a kind of expression Michelle knew well, one that spoke of judgment without words, and then she straightened and said more firmly, "Like he said, we are fully booked, there are no rooms left. You'll need to find another hotel, maybe the one across the street." Guests sitting nearby began to notice the exchange, their heads lifting slightly, some eyes curious, some surprised, but none speaking up. Michelle could feel the weight of their attention, though she stayed calm, her voice even and steady as she gently tapped the reservation slip again and said, "This shows a confirmed reservation for tonight. Under my name, could you please look it up on the system?" For a moment, the young man picked up the slip, glanced at it without really reading, and then with a small shrug pushed it back toward her, not touching the computer at all, his words carrying the same cold edge as before. "We can't help you, ma'am. You'll have to try somewhere else." The moment stretched longer than it should have, the warm lights of the lobby now feeling harsher, the cheerful piano music now sounding distant, the laughter from another guest ringing like an echo that belonged to another world entirely, a world where respect and courtesy were given freely. Michelle stood there with her suitcase at her side, her heart tightening, not with anger but with the deep ache of recognition, because she had seen this pattern many times before, in small gestures and closed doors, in voices that refused to listen. And now here it was again, not on some distant road but in her own creation, a hotel she had poured her heart into. She could have raised her voice, she could have demanded service, she could have revealed her identity in that moment, but instead, she took a slow breath, steadying herself, her mind already racing, already seeing beyond the sting of this moment toward the lesson that would soon unfold. She knew something the two employees did not know, something that would change everything in less than 10 minutes. She was not just a guest standing at the counter. She was the owner of this place, the person who had signed every check, approved every design, chosen every chair and lamp and painting on the wall. And tonight, by their own actions, the staff at the desk had shown her the truth of how they treated people when they thought no one important was looking, the truth of whether they carried the spirit of the hotel she had imagined or if they had let coldness replace kindness. She did not storm away, she did not argue. She simply picked up her slip of paper, tucked it back inside her bag, and nodded politely as though she accepted their rejection, though inside her chest her heart was speaking louder, promising that the next few minutes would reveal who truly belonged in this hotel and who did not. Guests still watched quietly, some perhaps sensing more than they could explain. But Michelle kept her grace, moving slowly to sit on one of the lobby chairs, her hands resting gently on her suitcase handle, her eyes calm though her mind was sharp as glass. She knew she would not need to wait long. In just a few minutes, truth would rise to the surface, and the staff who had turned her away would realize the weight of what they had done. 9 minutes was all it would take for the lobby to become silent, for whispers to spread, for their faces to fall when they discovered who she really was and why their careless dismissal had sealed their fate. The clock ticked. The lobby hummed with small sounds, but Michelle was no longer just a guest waiting for service. She was the owner waiting for justice, and every second brought her closer to the moment when everything would change forever. Michelle sat quietly in the soft chair of the hotel lobby, her hands resting on her suitcase, her posture calm but her thoughts moving quickly, like a river beneath still water. She watched the staff behind the counter continue their work as if nothing unusual had happened, answering other guests with polite smiles, offering them room keys, speaking with voices that carried warmth. They had refused her only minutes ago. She noticed the difference in their tones, the way their eyes softened for others, the way their movements became careful and pleasant, and she felt the sting of contrast in her chest. She knew very well that they had not checked the system for her reservation, and she knew it was not because the computers were broken or the rooms were truly filled, but because they had chosen to see her differently, chosen to decide that her presence was not welcome. And in that choice, they had revealed more about themselves than they realized. She did not let bitterness rise inside her. Instead, she let silence be her companion, waiting for the moment she had planned in her mind. She glanced at the large clock on the wall, the hands ticking toward the time when her presence would no longer be a quiet test, but a storm of truth. She thought back to the years she had spent building this place, the endless nights of planning, the meetings with architects, the challenges of funding, the interviews where she spoke of her vision with such passion, and the promises she made to herself that this hotel would never become just another business, but a living example of kindness, equality, and respect. She had chosen every design element with care, from the color of the carpets to the paintings on the walls, because she wanted guests to feel valued from the moment they stepped inside. Now, sitting there in the very space she had once imagined with so much hope, she realized the foundation of her dream was being tested not by strangers, but by the very people who were supposed to carry her vision forward. 9 minutes was not a long time, but in her heart it stretched endlessly, filled with memories of battles she had fought before, times when doors had been closed, times when voices had dismissed her worth, and she thought of how far she had come, and how she refused to let her own creation become another place where people were turned away unfairly. As she sat, a few guests stole glances at her, perhaps wondering why she had not left yet, perhaps sensing that there was something different about this woman, who carried herself with quiet dignity, even in the face of rejection. A little girl sitting with her parents looked at her curiously, her innocent eyes meeting Michelle's, and Michelle gave her a small smile, a reminder that kindness did not cost anything. Soon the doors of the lobby opened and the manager entered, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, carrying a tablet under his arm, his steps quick and his eyes scanning the room. Michelle had arranged for him to meet her here tonight without announcing to the staff why she was coming, because she wanted to see the truth without preparation or performance. When his eyes landed on her, recognition flashed instantly, and his face shifted from neutral professionalism to a mixture of respect and sudden alarm. He walked quickly toward her, bending slightly as he spoke in a low voice. "Mrs. Obama, welcome. We are honored to have you here tonight. I apologize deeply if you have been waiting." His words carried warmth and worry, and instantly the ears of the staff behind the desk perked up, their eyes darting toward Michelle, confusion beginning to spread across their faces. Michelle stood slowly, her voice calm but steady as she said, "I arrived some minutes ago with a confirmed reservation, but your staff told me there were no rooms available. They did not check the system and they dismissed me without care." Her words were not loud, but they carried across the lobby, reaching the guests nearby, reaching the staff who now looked pale and uncertain, their earlier confidence gone like dust in the wind. The manager's eyes widened and he turned toward the employees at the desk, his voice sharp now. "Is this true? Did you not check her reservation?" The young man stuttered, his face red, his hands gripping the counter while the young woman's lips trembled as she tried to form an excuse. But Michelle did not need their explanations. The truth was already clear in their earlier actions, in the coldness of their tone, in the careless way they had pushed back her reservation slip. She looked at them, her eyes firm but not cruel, and said, "This hotel was built to welcome people with respect no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter what they look like. If you cannot carry that vision, then you do not belong here. Her words fell heavy in the silence, the kind of silence that carried the weight of accountability. Guests whispered softly to one another, some with surprise, some with admiration, as they realized the woman they had just seen turned away was not only a guest but the very owner of the hotel, a leader known and respected across the country. The two employees stood frozen, their earlier coldness now replaced with fear. Their eyes lowered, unable to meet Michelle's steady gaze. The manager cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the moment, but Michelle gently raised her hand to stop him. She said with quiet authority, "In 9 minutes, this hotel has shown me its truth. And in 9 minutes, these two have shown me they cannot be trusted with my guests. Their service ends tonight." Her decision was final, her tone unshaken, and though her words were simple, they carried the weight of justice. The staff members tried to speak, to explain, but no excuse could erase the memory of how they had treated her, how they had treated someone they believed was unimportant. The manager nodded, understanding her command, and immediately began the process of releasing them from their duties. The lobby remained hushed, every guest now aware they had witnessed something extraordinary, a lesson in dignity, fairness, and the importance of carrying values into actions. Michelle took a breath, not with anger but with clarity, her heart steady as she knew she had done what was necessary to protect the spirit of her hotel. She looked once more at the faces around her, not with pride, but with the reminder that leadership was not about titles or ownership, but about protecting what was right, even in the smallest interactions. And as she prepared to finally step toward the elevator, this time with the respect she deserved, she carried with her the thought that sometimes the strongest lessons came not in grand speeches but in quiet moments, when someone simply refused to let wrongness stand unchallenged. The morning sun streamed through the balcony curtains, filling the suite with soft golden light as Michelle slowly opened her eyes. Her body rested but her mind already alert, ready for the responsibilities of the new day. She rose from the bed and stood by the window, looking out at the busy city below, watching people rushing to work, cars moving along the streets, and the rhythm of life continuing as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. Yet in her heart she knew the events of that evening would remain with her forever. She thought again of the two employees who had denied her a room, not with kindness or professionalism, but with dismissive coldness. And while she had already made her decision to let them go, she also understood that one decision was not enough to change the entire culture of a hotel. If she wanted her vision of hospitality to truly live, she would need to act boldly, not just in removing those who failed, but in guiding and strengthening those who remained. With this thought, she dressed simply but elegantly, carrying her natural grace, and made her way down to the dining area where breakfast was being served. Guests sat at tables enjoying plates of fruit, eggs, and pastries, while staff moved between them offering coffee refills and clearing plates. As she entered, a hush fell for a moment as several people recognized her face, their whispers soft but filled with respect, while the staff straightened immediately, offering polite greetings. Michelle smiled warmly, greeting them back, and sat at a small corner table, observing the flow of service, the interactions between workers and guests, noting both the strengths and the weaknesses. She ate quietly, her mind focused on the plan she had written in her notebook the night before, thinking of how best to create lasting change. When she finished, she asked to meet with the manager in one of the conference rooms. Within minutes, he arrived, his face still carrying the weight of the previous night, his eyes reflecting both respect and nervousness as he greeted her formally. Michelle gestured for him to sit, her voice calm but firm as she began. "Last night was a turning point not only for me but for this hotel. What I saw was more than poor service, it was a reflection of how deeply values must be reinforced. This hotel was built to stand as a place of welcome, and that cannot be compromised." The manager nodded quickly, apologizing once again, explaining that he had trusted his staff, that he had not expected such behavior, and that he was ready to make changes to prevent it from happening again. Michelle listened carefully, her eyes steady, then replied, "It is not enough to be sorry, we must rebuild. We must create a culture where respect is not optional but natural, where every employee understands that hospitality begins with the heart. That means better training, constant reminders, and leadership that does not look away." She could see the seriousness in his face, and she decided to give him both responsibility and opportunity, instructing him to organize an emergency staff meeting that very morning, where she would speak directly to the entire team. The manager agreed eagerly, and within an hour the word had spread through the hotel. Staff members gathering in the main hall, curious and perhaps nervous about what was about to happen. Michelle entered with quiet authority, the room falling silent as every eye turned toward her. She walked to the front, looked at the assembled group, and began to speak, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I built this hotel with the belief that kindness and respect would guide every interaction within these walls. Last night I came here as a guest unannounced to see how my staff treated people. When they thought no one important was watching, what I saw was painful. I was denied service not because of rooms being unavailable, but because judgment replaced hospitality. That is not acceptable, not here, not anywhere. Her words carried across the room like waves, and she could see the faces of her staff changing, some shocked, some ashamed, some inspired. She continued, I made the decision last night to let go of those who failed this standard. That was necessary, but today is about more than that. It is about building something stronger. This hotel must never become a place where people feel small, invisible, or unwanted. Our guests trust us with their comfort, and it is our duty to give them respect. She paused, letting her words sink in, then added, I am giving all of you the chance to rise higher. We will begin new training, new expectations, and I will be present more often, not as an owner in the distance, but as someone walking among you, watching, supporting, and reminding. But know this, those who cannot carry this vision will not remain here. A heavy silence filled the hall, followed by a quiet ripple of determination among many of the staff who straightened their shoulders, nodding slightly as though making promises to themselves. The manager stood beside her, supporting her message, and together they outlined the new steps: weekly meetings, workshops on empathy, open-door policies for guests to share experiences, and clear accountability for every employee. Michelle watched their faces, seeing which ones glowed with sincerity and which ones still carried resistance, and she made mental notes. She ended with a softer tone. This hotel is more than walls and rooms. It is a home for those who come from near and far. Let us make sure it is always a home of dignity. When the meeting ended, there was a sense of change in the air, a weight of seriousness, but also the spark of a new beginning. Some staff members approached her directly, thanking her for her words, expressing regret for what had happened, and promising to do better. Michelle listened kindly, offering both encouragement and reminders. The rest of the day passed with her walking through the hotel, greeting guests, observing staff, checking rooms and service areas. Her presence a quiet reminder that leadership was watching, but also caring. By evening, she sat once again in her suite, reflecting on the day's events, her heart both tired and hopeful. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, because culture could not be changed overnight, but she also knew that yesterday's pain had planted the seed of transformation. She whispered softly to herself, It will take time, but it will grow. And as the lights of the city flickered outside, she felt a steady strength rise within her, ready to face the final steps of this journey. The next morning came with a fresh breeze drifting through the open balcony of Michelle's suite, carrying with it the sound of the city waking to another day. But inside her heart there was a deeper calm, the calm that comes when a leader knows a difficult decision has been made and a new path has been chosen. She prepared herself slowly, taking a moment to sip tea by the window, her eyes following the sunlight as it touched the buildings, the streets, and finally the very hotel she had built with such love. Today was different, because today would not be about reacting to a mistake but about shaping the future. After breakfast, she gathered her notes, placed them neatly in her leather folder, and walked to the main conference room where the senior staff were already seated, their faces reflecting both respect and the nervousness of meeting her so directly after what had happened. Michelle entered with her usual grace, offering a polite greeting before taking her place at the head of the table, and then she began to speak in the same steady voice that had guided her through so many challenges before. She reminded them of the core values on which the hotel was built: dignity, kindness, fairness, and respect. And she told them clearly that these were not simply words for a wall or a brochure, but promises that must live in the heart of every worker. She explained that hospitality was not only about providing rooms, meals, or services, but about seeing the humanity in each guest, whether they were famous or unknown, wealthy or struggling, young or old, and she emphasized that failing to honor that humanity meant failing the very purpose of the hotel. The managers listened carefully, taking notes, nodding, and asking thoughtful questions, and Michelle responded with both firmness and encouragement, letting them know she trusted them to rise to the challenge, but also making it clear that excuses would not be tolerated. When the meeting ended, she walked out with them, stopping at different points to talk to staff members personally, asking them about their work, listening to their experiences, and showing them that leadership was not about distance but about connection. Some workers admitted quietly that they had sometimes felt overlooked themselves. That kindness was not always practiced among colleagues, and Michelle nodded, reminding them that respect must flow not only toward guests but toward one another, because a team built on dignity could not fail to extend it outward. By midday, she organized a smaller session with the housekeeping staff, the kitchen workers, and the maintenance crew, because she knew that true change began with those whose efforts were often unseen. She thanked them sincerely for their work, telling them that their dedication was the foundation of every guest's comfort, and she promised them better communication, more recognition, and the assurance that their voices would always matter. Her sincerity touched them deeply, and some left the room with tears in their eyes, realizing they were seen and valued in ways they had never experienced before. The entire day became a wave of transformation as Michelle moved from one group to another, her presence like a steady flame lighting the hearts of those who listened. And everywhere she went, she reminded them that the spirit of the hotel was not in the walls or the chandeliers, but in the hearts of those who served. By evening, the atmosphere of the entire building had changed. Staff moved with more care, greeted guests with warmer smiles, and carried themselves with a renewed sense of pride. Guests, too, noticed the difference, some even writing notes of appreciation or sharing kind words with Michelle when they crossed her path. Later that night, she returned once more to the quiet of her suite, setting her folder on the desk and stepping out onto the balcony, breathing deeply as the cool night air brushed her face. She thought of how quickly life could test a person's vision, how easily one careless moment could threaten years of hard work, and yet she also thought of how those same moments could be turned into opportunities for growth, for strength, for building something better. She remembered the young girl in the lobby who had watched her with innocent curiosity, and she wondered what lesson that child might carry with her after witnessing the truth unfold. Perhaps the lesson that dignity must be defended quietly but firmly. Perhaps the lesson that leadership was not about pride but about responsibility. Michelle allowed herself to smile softly at the thought, her heart warming as she realized that even small witnesses to truth could become carriers of it. She knew that the story of what happened would spread, perhaps slowly at first, perhaps quickly among certain circles, but she did not care for recognition or applause. What mattered to her was that her hotel had faced a test, and through it, she had reaffirmed her vision. The staff who remained would never forget the lesson, and those who had been let go would carry with them the memory of what dismissal felt like when respect was denied. She hoped they too might learn and grow from it even outside the walls of this place. As she stood there, the city lights shimmering in the distance, she whispered to herself, "Respect is the foundation, and it must never be broken." A reminder she would carry into every future step. The next morning, as she prepared to leave the hotel for a few days of travel, she walked once more through the lobby. Guests greeted her kindly. Staff members bowed their heads with respect, and the manager promised her that the changes she had demanded were already being set in motion. Michelle thanked him with a firm nod, then turned to the door, her suitcase rolling beside her as she stepped out into the world beyond, her heart strong and her spirit calm. She knew the journey was far from over, but she also knew she had done what was necessary, not only for herself but for every guest who would walk through those doors in the future. And as she left, the hotel stood tall behind her, no longer just a building of rooms and walls, but a living symbol of resilience, truth, and dignity, forever shaped by the night. Its owner was denied a room and responded not with anger, but with the quiet strength of justice. Michelle walked slowly toward the elevator, her calm figure moving with quiet grace as the lobby behind her remained hushed, the echoes of her words still lingering in the air like a heavy curtain no one dared to lift. The guests who had witnessed the scene leaned closer to one another, whispering in low voices, their eyes following her with a mixture of respect admiration, and astonishment. The two employees who had denied her service stood still behind the desk, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the ground, knowing their fate had been sealed in those 9 minutes and that no apology could undo the choice they had made. The manager, shaken but determined to restore order, hurried toward the staff office to begin the necessary paperwork, his mind filled with both regret and urgency, while Michelle pressed the elevator button with a steady hand. As the doors opened, she entered the cabin, her suitcase rolling beside her, and for the first time since she had stepped into the hotel that evening, she allowed herself to exhale deeply. Letting the tightness in her chest loosen just a little, she looked at her reflection in the mirror inside the elevator, her face calm but her eyes carrying the weight of years of struggle, memory, and quiet strength. She thought of all the doors in her life that had once been closed to her, of the times when her voice had been ignored, of the moments when she had been told she did not belong, and she realized that tonight was not simply about two careless employees, but about the principle that respect and fairness must never be negotiable, no matter who stood at the counter. As the elevator rose, she remembered the long journey of creating the hotel itself, the countless meetings where she explained her vision to skeptical investors, the moments when architects doubted her ability to manage such a large project, the late nights spent studying blueprints, the early mornings spent reviewing budgets, and the personal sacrifices she had made so that the hotel could stand as a symbol of excellence. Every chair, every curtain, every flower arrangement in the lobby had been chosen not just for style but to create a feeling of welcome, because she believed hospitality was not about buildings but about hearts. And yet, despite all of that, in just a few minutes her dream had been bruised by the careless behavior of those entrusted with its spirit. When the elevator reached her floor, the doors opened to a wide hallway lined with soft lights and carpets that muffled her footsteps, and she walked slowly, pulling her suitcase behind her, her mind still heavy but also clear in its resolve. She knew her decision had been right, but she also knew this incident was a warning, a reminder that leadership required vigilance, that values must be guarded constantly, and that trust must never be given lightly. She unlocked the suite that had been reserved for her, stepping into a space filled with quiet elegance. A wide bed covered in white linen, a desk by the window, a vase of fresh flowers on the table, and a balcony that opened to the city lights. She placed her suitcase by the door and stood by the balcony, looking out at the world beyond, her thoughts deep and steady. She thought of the guests who had seen everything, the young girl who had looked at her with innocent curiosity, the families who would remember this night not as just another stay at a hotel, but as a lesson in courage and truth. She knew that tomorrow the story might spread, perhaps whispered among guests, perhaps carried further, but she also knew that even if no one spoke of it again, the lesson had already been planted in the hearts of those who had seen it. The lesson that dignity cannot be denied, that truth always rises. She sat at the desk, pulled out a notebook, and began writing notes, her pen moving steadily across the page as she outlined the steps she would take next. It was not enough to remove two employees. She would need to build stronger training, clearer guidelines, and a culture so deeply rooted in respect that no guest would ever feel dismissed or invisible within these walls again. She wrote about the need for regular workshops for leadership at every level to understand the vision, for staff to be reminded daily that hospitality was not just a job but a responsibility. She thought of the manager, who had looked both surprised and regretful, and she made a note to meet with him personally, to remind him that leadership meant more than carrying a title. It meant ensuring that every person on his team reflected the values of the hotel. Hours passed as she wrote, the city lights twinkling outside, the quiet hum of the building around her, and when she finally set her pen down, she felt a sense of clarity and purpose. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes briefly, and allowed herself to breathe deeply, knowing that though the evening had been painful, it had also been necessary. She understood now that sometimes truth came to light in uncomfortable ways, but those moments were also opportunities to rebuild stronger, to protect what truly mattered. Later, as she prepared for rest, she thought once more of the two employees who had dismissed her, and though she did not carry anger, she carried the sadness of knowing how quickly kindness could be replaced by judgment, when hearts were not prepared to see the worth of every person. She whispered softly to herself, almost like a prayer, that her hotel would learn from this, that her staff would grow, and that her vision would not be lost. She turned off the lights, lay down on the bed, and as the city continued to move outside, she closed her eyes, her spirit calm but her resolve sharper than ever. She knew the next day would bring meetings, decisions, and perhaps questions from many people. But she was ready, for she had faced much harder battles before. Tonight was simply another chapter, another reminder that respect must be defended, and that true leadership meant standing firm even when the test came unexpectedly. And with that thought, Michelle drifted into a quiet sleep, her heart steady, her mind already preparing for the dawn of a new day.